it was idyllic. We had kind of a Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn existence. We lived about 2 blocks from here on Furman Avenue. When we moved out here in 1956, we moved from Shandon. Back then it was the fad to move out of Shandon. All this area around here in Forest Acres was just being developed. New houses everywhere. All the World War II veterans were moving out here, raised family, big families, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, big yards, lots of playing room. I was 8 years old when we moved out here. Trenholm Plaza at that time was a broom sedge field. And broom straw, it was just a big field, a creek running through the middle of it. They built the shopping center, I think, in the late 50s, maybe 3 years after we moved out here. But this was our Mississippi River, so to speak. This was our, kids are attracted to water like a magnet. If there's water within a half a mile, kids will find it. And we had a grand time getting some of our old playmates from Shandon to come visit for a day, usually on a Saturday. And they would invariably get wet, despite their mothers always told them, whatever you do, don't get wet. But we'd come down here and play with them, and they'd always fall in, or we might push them in. And we'd have to send them home in our clothes, because theirs were soaking wet. But we just had a grand time playing in these woods. Across the creek there, that's all a private gated development now, but we were living here, growing up in here, that was part of Fort Jackson. And it stayed part of Fort Jackson until they built I-77. And that basically cut off 300 acres of Fort Jackson, which they in turn sold to the developer. But when we were growing up, the fort never used this over here. They never used it. It was just kind of a buffer. And we kind of thought of it as our place. So that's where we went to play in the creeks and fish. And of course, we fished all the way from Forest Lake Dam all the way down to Lake Catherine. That's a stretch of maybe 2 miles, something like that. And we knew every tree and bush and critter in this whole place. And like I say, it had a huge impact on me because, you know, kids go through that stage where they built forts and huts and play in the woods. Most of my buddies grew out of that phase, and I never did. Well, the biggest change, of course, has been urban development. They built the shopping center in the late 50s, and then, you know, they built around the edge of the creek. When we were fishing, especially, we'd walk up to the base of Forest Lake Dam and fish below the dam from the stretch there down to Forest Drive. It was, you know, the land belonged to somebody, but it was not developed. So it was kind of a free range, so to speak, free range for kids and fishermen. They were always fishermen up there. So starting, I guess, maybe in the mid-late 60s and 70s, they started building right up to the edge of the creek. You couldn't do that now. You'd be walking in somebody's backyard. So it's basically the access to the creek here is very much more restricted than when we were growing up. The creek itself looks pretty much the same. It's always been shallow like this. One issue of any watershed, an urban watershed, is of course the sedimentation and the runoff. And when you hardscape all the watershed, when you don't leave buffers along the creek bank, all that sediment just runs into the creek. And but it was shallow like this when we were kids. Now, historically, in the 1800s, This creek was a blackwater stream, like the Edisto River, the little PD. It's got more sedimentation in it now, so it's not that jet black black water that we associate with coastal streams and rivers.